Hi everyone, welcome to the Theory into Practice video. The reason I'm chuckling is because this is about the 50th time I've tried to record this video. And we're hoping this time it'll be okay. So we're going to go through the assignment briefing slowly and carefully, and it's easy for me to say this, I think it's pretty straightforward with regard to what the rationale does and then what you're meant to do in a performance. Now, hopefully we're at a point now where people are starting to think about and choose their story. Bear in mind, and I hope I will say this later, that your performance must be no less than 10 minutes. Any less and that you will be deducted points on presentation, or certainly it will affect the score on your presentation or the content and understanding, because that just shows you haven't engaged in the model at that level. So make sure that you can tell that story for 10 minutes and it doesn't feel drawn out or anything like that. Something to just think about. And I say that in this recording because I just want to make sure that you think you can do that with the story that you're going to end up choosing. Okay, 10 minutes goes quite quickly, by the way. And the idea of this kind of session overview really is to make sure you're comfortable with both parts. Now, of course, if you've got any questions, just click in the top left and go to that sheet and ask away. I will try and get back to you now as soon as I can within 2 working days. If I haven't, email me and say, hi Matt, I asked a question, you haven't answered it yet. There will be a really good reason why I haven't answered it straight away. So the reason I've got those references down there on the side is, as you will remember, I always try to leave hints and tips toward information that could help you with either the rationale or the performance. So always do with your essay. And you can see there that there's allusions there to storytelling being really good at building up comprehension. So thinking about that maybe in your rationale or your performance. And then also to building up a sense of vocabulary. And then finally, with Viv's comment at the end, that element of interaction, that element of the storytelling being a form of dialogue and story in which everyone feels involved, from the teller to the audience. And that's a really important part of how I assess the performance itself, and maybe a part of the rationale depending on what you choose to write about. So knowing all of that, let's move on. So how is, I think you're already going to be fine with this, but then how is your performance different to telling a story or reading a story out aloud? Well, the things that I guess I'm looking for is to make sure that when you tell your story, that it will have a structure for sure, but it won't feel scripted. So in the past, students have talked about, do you want this done the Talk for Writing Pi Corbett way, where every word is remembered, every intonation recorded, and the answer of course is no, that's terrible. Don't do that at all. You're going to have to remember your structure, and you might have planned the voices that you're going to use for different characters. You might have planned, and I suggest you plan moments where you stop and embellish, or you stop and you ask the audience to interact in some way, but don't script it. That would be awful. I think I told you of the horror time where one student came in and literally just read a story verbatim and obviously failed and had to do it again. So it's about owning, loving, knowing the story. That's certainly important. And practice telling the story to lots of different people, or the same person, poor person, many times, be it partner, be it a friend, be it your children. Perhaps you're nannying and it's the children that you're nannying for. But have a go at kind of saying the story over and over until you know it inside out. But also perhaps you've worked out which parts of your story are weak and might need something to enrich it, and which parts of the story are your great parts that you want to build up on. And when you're doing those things and you're planning about your story, you want to be thinking about voice, and you want to be thinking about what props you're going to use and why those props, and whether you're going to wear something at certain times to get into character or to step out of character. I think a few years ago, a student, when they became the narrator, so they had a story about a king and a prince, And when they became the narrator, they wore a kind of cloak to say, I am now stepping into the narrator's role and telling you what happened. And then when they went back to being one of the characters, they removed the robe and they stepped into that character. And it's a really nice way of showing stepping in and out of character. That doesn't mean I'm looking for that. I'm just telling you that that was a technique that worked for their story. And the other very important part, and it's quite funny that I ask you to do this because it was something I never really did before, but the other important part obviously is ensuring that there's some audience participation in some way, and not just once, but a few times throughout that telling. So the reason I've written in a story shared, there's that construction, that co-construction, I think, of telling a story, and that scaffolding, that flexibility and negotiation. The reason I've mentioned them is in audience participation, sometimes you might invite them to help you describe a monster or a house or what's in a house or what's in a pot or what might be in a bag. And I think that's a really powerful thing to draw the audience in. Maybe they're climbing a mountain and you're allowing them to choose a route through the mountain that they've got to climb up to go and find a silver axe or something from a cave. So that idea that together you co-create some meaning is great. The only thing I will say, not as a negative thing at all, but something that students needed to work on in the past, and I think it was because they were so nervous, is someone would give an idea and they'd go, oh, that's great, and then move on, but not really build on what it was that was good about that idea, whether it's a word to describe the dragon or whether it was a phrase or a simile perhaps to describe the way the sun was shining down as one lone adventurer was running through a desert. Those kind of things are important. And also, obviously, when we're assessing, try not to pick on your best mate to give you the answer that you've prepped them for. Make this kind of real. It doesn't matter if you get a giggle and a silly answer. It's all part of that kind of experience. And then I was trying to think about why the Kamishibai stuff is up. I'll answer that last thing before I move into that. And that is the EEF stuff, which I've mentioned so often now. But really that's going to be things like, what's the focus in English? Is it on vocabulary? Is it on story structure? Is it on inference? Is it on building up language? Are there kind of things you can do in your performance that encourages children in your class to do those elements? And the reason I've mentioned the Kamishibai is just to kind of rain check you on, there's lots of different ways for you to perform your story. You can use the Kamishibai approach if you want. Traditionally what would happen is they'd have a script on the back of all the cards and use that as prompts, and it would tell them what pictures coming next. But obviously in the version we've already watched or will watch later, that student didn't need to do that because they'd prepped it enough. So they had all their thinking in hand, which was excellent. But it's up to you what approach you use. I think the only thing I would caution against is the staticness of your performance. Now, Kamishibai, obviously, it's the pictures that are doing the talking, but there's nothing wrong with you using your facial expressions, tone, the top half of your body if you're sitting down, or even if you're standing, that kind of sense of moving around. And there's nothing wrong with using Kamishibai, but maybe bringing in a physical prop too, and using that alongside the board. It's up to you. But I think that idea of audience participation is important, but also thinking about what you're doing all the time, and that kind of the staticness of a performance kind of can kill it, really. So even if you're standing on your own 2 feet or sat down, think about how you're using your body to make it not look like you're just doing nothing at all apart from talking. And then what I find is that if I were you, I would still continue to watch a few performances, either from Alistair Daniel or from a performance I've shared, or previous performers that I've shared with you via a YouTube link. And when you're watching those performances, in a way, what I've got here is, I guess, how I moderate your performances at some level. When you're watching these performances, the first way to watch it is at a surface level, which is you just watch the story and you listen to it and you understand the story. You go, oh, that's a nice story. I get that message. That's a nice message. So, you take something away from the story through taking it in. Okay. And then at the discourse level, you're watching that story for a second time. And this time you're looking at the language the storyteller uses, how they bring phrases together. Maybe you're thinking about how loud or quiet they are, or the tone they're using for certain moments in the storytelling. Or you're looking at their facial expressions, or the gestures they use with their hands or the rest of their body, and then how they're using their space on the stage or wherever they're performing. This is what a good analysis process is for when we're looking at how others tell a story, and best how master storytellers tell a story, so we can pick up and use these techniques ourselves. And then of course you've got the narrative level, which is you can break the story down into its component parts. So this happens first, then they did this, and then they did this. Oh, they used this technique where they introduced and brought in the audience. That was interesting. I can understand why they did that then, actually, because they then repeated that refrain frequently with the audience being brought in all the time. So it might be that there are structures and schemes that are being used throughout. Okay. And then the other one is thinking about how you're making it clear, not just the theme of the story, but how language choices and vocabulary choices affect the way the audience might feel about a character or a moment or an attitude. And I think Izzy Mead talks about and models this really well, where she talks about expression, pauses, moments of quiet, moments of drama, and thinking about where we have those kind of ups and downs. I think Izzy refers to those kind of moments as affecting the different kind of temperaments of people, whether it's sanguine or whether it's melancholic or whether it's choleric or whether it's phlegmatic. So you might want to think about going back to the handbook that she gave us on that and thinking about those moments too. There's lots to think about, isn't there? So one of the reasons we're kind of doing it this way, because some people are saying, how come we're doing film? How come we're doing computer games? Isn't this just about storytelling? And well, no, this is about outstanding practice in English. It's just that I've chosen for the assessment to come through telling stories because I found as a teacher, that learning to tell stories was probably the most powerful thing I ever learned, full stop, as an educator. But this is about supporting and engaging them in oral retelling, in remembering story, in noting story structure too, okay, and helping them understand that element. So you've got here a story structure, and I think later on I'll show it you with maybe Red Riding Hood. Okay, and we don't need them because I think I had them up earlier, to be honest. But you can see here is the story structure. Okay, and coda being kind of that lesson we had at the end. So let's go back. So this is the story structure of Little Red Riding Hood, and when you perform the story, one of the things I'll ask you is to show me the structure of your story a little bit like this. You could actually do it like this if you'd like, but it lets me know what the structure of the story is and that you've recognized the different parts of the story. Adding in the abstract, which is kind of you setting the tone for the beginning of the story, how you're going to do that. Okay, and then it's like a preface when you read a novel. It's like a preface, and then here you've got the epilogue, which is maybe thinking about the changes that the character went through. Sometimes you don't want to say that in the story because it will spoil it. You want to leave the listener to work it out themselves, and sometimes you don't. You want this kind of off into the sunset moment where the character has grown. So moving on. So there are other ways of modelling that story structure, and these are other ways too. What's important for me is that when you perform your story, I write later on how before you perform, you're to hand me a piece of paper. That's A4. It can be double-sided, but on it, it will have the title of the story, maybe a quick summary, but it will also have, here's the story structure. A bit like on these pages here or on the previous page too. That's important for me, so that I can see that your story has a specific structure. That's why I'm not worried at all, but it might be difficult if you've chosen a really short story. And then the other thing I would be thinking of, you almost like want this as a checklist really, which is how are you making sure that you make the most of these elements of telling a story? You know, whether it's you're using sound, you can use sound on a mobile phone or something if you want, but remember that in doing that, sometimes the audience might have to wait, pause for you to find your phone, put it on, and it can spoil the drama. So have a think about how you're doing that and the ways that you're using it. It could be that you've got a friend in the audience who's on the module who will press the button for you and things like that. Whatever works for you. A couple of years ago, someone wanted to pretend that they were around a campfire telling a story. So they had on a screen behind them. I mean, we'd find this difficult being in the room that we're going in, but we could do it. A forest and the sound of campfire crackling. It was really nice sense of building up an atmosphere. But I think I've talked about lots of them already. One of the reasons I liked to mention repetition is because I think certainly with fairy tales, there's that a lot of sense of, repeating phrases, things coming in threes. So they can help do all of these things really. And these might be things that you end up mentioning in your rationale, that a reason why you've chosen some of the techniques that you've chosen. And then, this is me just bringing up that sense of vocabulary again, why I think it's important. And the reason I've said everyone is a storyteller is just to emphasize that sense of audience participation, audience joining in some way, whether it's suggesting a word or whether it's suggesting an action or whether it's doing actions. I don't know, the yoga came around the corner, it was hideous, and everyone in the town gasped. Can you gasp with me? Cover your eyes, oh, that kind of thing. I think they're nice things to do. I think they're nicer, those kind of moments, they're nicer if it's repeated. I think doing things like one-off like that, I don't know what kind of impact they have really, and how they help. So lots of you are already kind of past this, but one of the things that's mentioned is, well, what kind of story can we tell? I think I've even mentioned you could even retell the story you looked at in your pitch book for my other assignment. Absolutely fine. I think the thing that's important to me is that it's an engaging story. You like the message that it's got, and you see lots of opportunities for enriching vocabulary, a sense of drama and engagement and participation. So it could be anything from a local folktale from Oxford to a Greek myth to a Native American traditional tale to a creation myth to something that feels slightly anecdotal. So, something that happened the other day, but you've got a moral behind it. It's up to you which one you do. And then the other thing is, the reason I've said retellings is because last year a student did a really good job of retelling a story that challenged gender stereotypes. So it was a retelling of Pinocchio, but they chose to twist it, and they'd found the story and said, here's the story, this is the story that I'm tweaking, and that was great too. And I think it's important that you do tell a story that's been written down or recorded somewhere rather than I've made one up myself. And the other thing is, just make sure that I can access the story in some way, so I can read it, look at it, and see how you chose to interpret it. That's important too. Okay. These moments here are just helpful for us to think about, rather than simply just telling the story or retelling it. These kind of questions, who's the main character? What are they trying to do? What's their quest? Why? What's the lesson they're taking from this at the end? What are their challenges? That's going to help you think about gesture, tone, pace, whether you need description, what parts of the story you want to focus on and why. And I guess that bit there, what parts of the story do you want to focus on in the telling and draw out or draw the audience in, and why? That's the thing that goes from a story that's in the 50s to the story that's in the 70s. when you've really thought about not just the structure of that story that I showed you earlier, but points in a story that you want to draw out because they're moments that are important in understanding the story, or in understanding a character, or a moment, a dilemma, or a moment of victory perhaps, or a moment of regret. They're the bits that are important because that's why we tell these stories. So thinking about key moments in the story and why they're your key moments related to the theme is more important than, oh, there's lightning in this story, so I'm going to get out a kind of little wobbly card and do my lightning thing. Because, I'll be there going, why? Why did you do that? How did that enrich the storytelling? If it does because it's a moment of drama, fine. But if you're only doing it because you think it'd be cool to make a lightning noise, unfine. So that's what's good about that kind of moment there, thinking about what it should look like. And I think these bits are important too. I don't think we need to go through this too much really, because we've kind of gone through it earlier. But why am I telling that story? And with the greatest respect, I know you're at a point where you're kind of going, I just need to find any story and I'm just going to tell it. Then I'd already say you're starting on a back foot already. So take the time to find a story you're going to like telling, and you really like it. Okay, and think about why it is that you want to tell that story. What is it about the characters? Is there something in the events that you think is interesting? Is there something in the lesson that's learned at the end that's worth telling it? And then you might want to start thinking about language, what's in the story that you want to draw out. Maybe it's a repeating refrain. Maybe it's some keywords used to describe a moment. But it could also be you're seeing in your head moments where you can engage the audience through your performance in some way. So discourse is just different ways that we communicate. And again, I feel I've talked an awful lot about this and about how you're going to deliver your story. So I don't want to spend too much on it, but it's like, what is it in the story that I like, that I want to tell? How will I structure that story? Then how will I share that story? That's what I mean by that theme, narrative, and discourse. What's the messages in this story? What are the moments, narrative? How am I going to share this story? Through expression, through body, through props, through space, all those elements too. These are the things you do to plan in telling a story well. And I don't think I need to kind of go through this element too much, because I think it just goes back to other sections as well. I'm looking at this thinking, is there anything else I need to say to this? Not really. I think that who's telling the story is a good thing to think about. Meaning, are you a narrator? Are you a storyteller? Are you the main character themselves telling the story? Are you let's think about like Red Riding Hood or something like that. Maybe you're not the narrator, as in the person watching everything from afar. Maybe you're a little bird that's watching everything going on, and you've decided to be a character in that scene. Now you've got to think of a good reason why you want to be that little bird watching the narrative and relaying it back to all of us. But it's really good to think about, when you step into character, who are you and why are you? So, a good twist on the Red Riding Hood would be you're the wolf telling the story because you're twisting the interpretation of what's going on. Or maybe you're the grandmother telling the story. So thinking about who it is we're meeting when you tell that story is important. And it isn't just a student telling a story. Are you stepping into character as the storyteller? Or are you stepping into character as someone watching the events unfold? Or are you stepping into character being one of the characters in the play? So, and if so, how do you step out of that character into another character? It's something to think about. Because that might affect lots of things like your phrases and your language when you're using it. So let's look at the structure. Hopefully that makes sense. And there's some slides further on that talks about positioning, and I don't really want to spend too much time on them. But it's worth mentioning that the performance is 50% and the rationale is 50% too. So you can see that the performance involves you either creating a story or retelling a story in some way. I'm looking at the props that you might use or prompts, what resources you use to engage and involve the audience, so that it's more collaborative than you just telling a story, and then how you use the environment around you to engage the rest of us. I think what I'm really looking for is it's clear you've gone back, looked through the module sessions, looked at the reading list, and used that to inform how to perform really well. The simplest example of that would be watching the prop stuff again and thinking about good ways of using props as well, and maybe watching some of Alistair's videos. And then the rationale itself is just some of the choices you made in your performance and why you chose to do those things. So maybe it's rich vocabulary, maybe it's audience participation, maybe it's tone of voice, maybe it's position, maybe it's repetition. So there's a reason as to, it explains some of the choices you made and why you chose to make those choices, so to speak. I'm just looking at the last bit in the middle. You can see there, I've said it so many times now, haven't I? It's about how you're being collaborative, how you're enriching vocabulary, how you're thinking about questions you might ask the audience and how do you do that well. And, maybe you're thinking about how the storytelling itself is going to lead into some sort of writing or retelling themselves at the end. And once again, I've kind of emphasized that whole, if your stories are below 10 minutes, I would argue you're going to be penalised in some way. So make sure they're 10 minutes. I'd rather them not over 15 minutes. So somewhere between those two is important for me. 9 minutes 59 I can let go. And then what you'll do is you'll write your rationale. You'll hand it in, and then in your feedback, the big long bit where you can read all your feedback on strengths and development, in there will be feedback for the rationale and feedback for your performance. So you'll get your overall grade will be in there, and you'll get everything in that one space. So that's the thing to think about there, and I'll make it really clear what is what. Now, I don't really want to talk about these elements really, because you won't get to choose where people go very much in the performance. We will kind of sit in almost a half circle, but these are like explaining the choices as to why. You are very welcome to move us for your performance if you feel it's something you want to do and explain, okay? But I put these up because it explains the choice I'm making when I position us in the telling of the performance. So let's go through the performance first. Bearing in mind, I think we've done a lot of it already, right? But as it says, it's 10 to 15 minutes. Obviously, you'll have a place to sign up and tell your story. I think for the group I'm videoing now, everyone's now done that. Okay, but you need to know that you will have the time you need to set up between the sessions. So first person comes up, performs, they'll have the most time pretty much if they're on time, because they'll be the first. But the second person will have to wait for the first person to remove all their stuff, then set up, and it's when they say "I am now ready, Matt," that we start watching. So you've got time to slowly perform. Don't worry about it. Just you get ready and then get yourself ready. There's no timer waiting to watch you, okay? And as I say, I'll set up the audience unless you choose differently, okay? And you will need to, prior to the performance, hand me an A4 piece of paper that's got various bits on it, which I'll explain later on. But it gives me an overview of your thinking. So I say again here, make sure you've practiced a few times. It honestly tells if you haven't. And make sure you've got everything with you on the day. You can double check before you turn up. And the other thing to remember, which I think is a lovely thing, is that you're such a big group this year. Remember, this year being 22 to 23, so if you're watching this another year and there's only 6 of us, oh dear. But remember that you're all going through it. So you used to get students saying, well, how can I top that one that's just been? And try not to think of it like that. Try not to think of it as the great pottery throwdown kind of element. It's just like we're all supporting each other. We're all happy for each other. We're all wishing each other well, okay? Everyone's got lots of things going on in their life. and other things to stress about, including finding a job. Honestly, don't beat yourself up about this. Try your very best to enjoy it as much as you can. The other thing I would say in connection to that is students have a tendency to kind of mumble or talk or think about their performance when they're watching other performances. I would ask you to respectfully kind of participate, enjoy, and join in with that student's performance, because they will do the same for you, rather than think, oh, I've got to do that and I've got to do this. Just enjoy the performance. You've done as much as you can. Let's see what happens, okay? And then what am I looking for when you perform? Well, I'm prior to performing, I'm looking to see that you've watched some performances, that you've obviously clearly had a go and honed your performance really well. So as I say, it doesn't have to be verbatim word-wise, but maybe you've got actions and movements and phrases that you've got down to a T because you've practiced them, or voices. And I can see clearly from the way you use a prop, to the way you use your tone, to the way you use your height and body. You've watched performances, you've listened to my sessions, you've watched Izzy, and all those bits are coming in. Okay, don't know what that was there. So I think the only thing worth mentioning here is that idea of when you're involving the audience in some way, it might be through just fun, but you've thought about the why behind that involvement, and some of it might be seeing if they're engaged, if they're kind of able to summarize, or if they're building up vocabulary, or if they're remembering key events, or if you're asking them to join in and build up phrases or imagery in some way, or actually be in the story in some way. Okay, those are the things I might want you to think about. And then the other thing is, how we're communicating in different ways. So it might be with our bodies, it might be with a prop, always using good eye contact, thinking about where you are at all times. Hopefully everyone can see your face at all times and read your expression. In the past, some students have found that quite difficult to do. They've forgotten that they need me to make sure that everyone can read their facial expressions. You're thinking about the language that you're using, and you're thinking about how you're going to start your story and how you're going to close your story, and how they kind of set the mood for the tone of the story. That was those elements that I showed before about that coda. How does your story open? How are you letting everyone know what kind of story they're coming into? And then here, you don't need to watch it, but it tells you the 3 different types of stories, and it's just a video of a specialist looking in a very random direction after about 30 seconds, but they do talk you through these elements that you need to think about, so you can watch that in your own, or at your own leisure, I should say. So I'll just play it again so you can see it. There. Okay, so there they are talking, and then they do this odd, really weird thing where they kind of look in a different direction later on. But yeah, that's the bit I want you to think about, and go back and watch. Okay. So I feel I've kind of done this an awful lot, where we're talking about the performances, but I'm trying to justify some of the reasons why I'm getting you to focus on this whole building up vocabulary and trying to think about story structure and making that clear. That's why that's got to be clear in that little handout that you give me before you perform. But there's nothing wrong with you saying in your rationale, the reason I did audience participation where we built up some vocabulary is because the EEF, or the reading framework, asks for this, that and the other, and the research says that actually through oral discussion about language, this is a really good thing to do. So that's why I did it. Absolutely nothing wrong with doing that, and if anything, I guess I'm going to encourage you to do that, because that for me is a really nice understanding of the theory behind why the choices that you're making in your performance connected to the curriculum itself and standards as well. So I like that idea of think about the fact that you're trying to bring the story and language to life. So I don't need to talk about this because I've made it really clear in sessions about where you can get your stories from. So has Izzy from the Story Museum. The thing I might want you to think about is choosing the right story for the right year group and for you as well. So something to think about there too. And again, I don't think I need to talk about these because it's quite clear. you can do this. You can say, I've chosen this story because, sipping on tea by the way, sorry, because it might fit an area of the curriculum. You might say, I'm telling this story to year 5 or year 6, upper key stage 2. They do this culture, so I'm going to tell this story. You also might think, I feel really uncomfortable telling an Inca story and I'm going to dress up. So I'm going to tell it, but I might talk about being respectful and how I'm not going to do that, but I'm going to make it clear that this is their story and this is where it's coming from. The main thing is that you find a story that you want to share. But if you want to connect it to national curriculum and make that clear in your plan, that's a good thing to do. So this slide here is a direct nod to Izzy and her work, and you'll find it in the handbook that Izzy made called An Introduction to Oral Storytelling for Children and Families. And I really recommend that you look through it really carefully and see the kind of things that Izzy's recommending, because she's got some blooming good ideas in there on how to tell a story well. And it's only been written in 2023 for the National Literacy Trust. So it's brand new, worth looking at, okay? So the thing that I noticed in the handbook, and all this comes from her handbook, by the way, is she says the same things that I think about: facial expression, the pace of the story, eye contact, and that you're thinking about developing vocabulary, and that when you're telling the story, you want to think about smells and sounds and textures that you might want to emphasize. I don't know, a good example would be from a texture, you might use some descriptive language, or if it, the hero encounters a giant snake, perhaps you've somehow got some snake skin that the audience can touch or rub or something like that, because you think it will help. Don't do it because you think it'll be cool. It must help in the telling of the story. The thing that's very important is on the handout that you give me before you perform, is that you do these 3 things below. So I've talked to you about, I want an order of your story. Okay, structurally, I don't mind how it looks, story mounting or the blocks that I showed you earlier. But either on the back page or on another page, I want you to use the red dots, blue mist and yellow sparks. Now, if you were not at the Story Museum, you're going to be stuck with this. So I'm going to explain it slowly and carefully. The red dots are pretty much the same as the story mounting. You write beneath them or within the red arrow the events of the story in order. Okay, so this happens, then this happens, then this happens, this happens. You have a series of red arrows following each other. The blue mist are moments in the story where you want to slow down the storytelling and add some description. It might be you want to evoke a sense of place, or you want to lull the listeners into a slow, steady sense of security. But you want to build up a sense of space and place, so you need to slow it down. So blue mist moments in your story are moments where there's lots of description. It could be a character description, it could be an object description, it could be place description, or it could be describing a moment with great care. And you would place those blue mist moments above the red dot arrow, and you might write in it something like character description of Oberon. So your character. You don't have to explain why, you just have to explain what's happening there, as a way of thinking about, in this moment I need to slow it down. And then the yellow sparks is audience participation. So above or below the red dot, it really doesn't bother me which one you do, whichever works for you. But above the red dot, you might say something along the lines of, in the yellow spark, star, so you could just use 1 star. I'm going to ask the audience to come up with words to describe the mountain, okay, or repeat this refrain, or think of words to describe the sword, or at this point, 3 of the audience stand up and help to pretend to be riding horses, something like that. But it's moments in the story where you think this is where the audience are going to be joining in, or blue mist, this is where I'm going to slow down the telling, and then those kind of elements are important. So what's lovely about that is I can see that you've thought carefully about moments where you want to change the pace, blue mist, slow down, or moments where you want to bring the audience in, yellow sparks, okay? And you only need to give very brief a few words saying what's happening in all three of those elements. So red dots, the order of your story and what happens next until the end, beginning to end. Blue mist, key moments that you're going to stop at and slow down for description. And yellow sparks, audience participation. And what's great is when you've done it, you'll look at it and go, oh my God, there's too much blue mist. Those children in my class that like quick pacey stories are going to get bored. Okay. And if there's no blue mist, you're going to go, oh, there's kids that like to take their time, slow down, enjoy and get involved and immersed in the story. They're not going to enjoy it because it's too quick. There's too much action and they're not able to slow down and take it in. And if you don't do those yellow spark moments, then I'm going to be there going, there was no audience participation, or it was a bit false, it was a bit rushed, that wasn't very good. Or if there's too much, you'll be like, I lost the story because you spent so much time asking for feedback or getting some involvement and the thread of the story was lost. So it's important that you have a title of the story, maybe a very quick summary, a few sentences about what the story is about. In the past, students have copied and pasted the story because it was quite short. Doesn't bother me, you can do that. But then that's kind of story mountain form or whichever one you want to use. And then somewhere else, this bit. Okay, which is the red dots, blue mist and yellow sparks. And I feel like I've explained that pretty well now on how to do that. Okay. The other thing that I'll need to know on that piece of paper is what key stage you're performing your story at, the title of the story, OVS, what key stage you're performing towards. And I've said here, copy the story in written or visual form, but that just means, you can write a summary. Let's imagine someone's got a story and it's 8 pages long. And they're remembering it. I don't need those 8 pages. I just need, here is the story written in 200 words, something like that, okay? And then you can see there I've said a list of the resources you're going to use and for what purpose. So you might do it in a table, might be quite nice, mightn't it? Where you've got prop, and then you write bag, and then you write on the right side what it's being used for. And what's nice about that is that I can see when you forgot to use a prop, I can go, oh, they were going to use it for that. Oh, that would have been really good. Never mind. Okay, but I'll remember that that's what they were going to do it for. And you can also see I've mentioned the red dots, blue mist and yellow sparks model there too. And the narrative structure. And then finally, you might mention some of the themes that are coming up in your story. And when I say might, I mean will. Okay, so it's up to you how you set it out, but you might have the title at the top and then in brackets, the key stage that you're working towards. And then underneath a summary of the story, and then you might have the resources that you're going to use, and then the narrative structure, and then on the back you might have that kind of red dot, blue mist, yellow spark model, and then underneath at the very bottom you might have, and these are the themes I'm going to cover. And that's kind of it. That's the thing you need to hand in to me. And there's some more example of stories that have been done. But hopefully that's now really clear, because some people were saying to me, what has to go on that piece of paper? Are we graded on it? I guess in a way you're graded in that it will support you in that column where there's content and understanding, because it will show you've gone through this process carefully to think about your performance. And so, yeah, the more I think about it, imagine you do a really bad performance because just like you can't cope and things go on, then it could be that A4 sheet kind of props you up a little bit, because it's like, oh, I could see what they were trying to do there, with that audience participation. They forgot to put that in, but here I can see what they were trying to do. So sure, those kind of things could happen as well, couldn't it? And then, sorry, I'll go back to that. So that there is a performance there that you can watch. In the session, we talked about what were the strengths of that performance and what things they could have worked on. It will be the same from me as well. When I give you your feedback, I'll talk about what things you did really well and then things we might work on. I'm well aware this is literally probably your final assignment, so I don't know how much you'll read those areas, but I want the feedback to be genuine and honest to you as well, or with you as well. So, moving on. So these are the things that I thought were really good in the performances over the last year. The top performances. These are all on site as well in M101. All those elements at the top. I'm just going to leave them there and see if there's anything worth mentioning. Yeah, some of them got the audience to provide the music. So like little chimes at certain points. It kind of worked. It was nice. I think they gave chimes to one or two students, and they had to play them at sometimes. Sometimes they played some music in that coda element, I don't mean coda because that's the end, isn't it? But in that opening, they played some music as they were setting up and getting ready, and that helped present the theme or the tone of the story. It's really nicely done. They made sure, like Alistair Daniel, that props were nearby, so they didn't have to shuffle off and get someone and come back. They all had a person. Someone said when we trialed the myth performances, someone said, "Oh God, I didn't treat that prop very nicely when I put it down, did I?" And that was so thoughtful of them, because they were well aware that it's that kind of object affordance, that, you know, that concrete gaze. So thinking about those elements when you're using the props. And then it's got their audience participation, whether they're up performing with you or whether you're asking questions or suggestions. Just make sure when you do those elements, you do it well. Don't worry about how long it's taking. Worry about, you know, listening to the feedback and things like that. And then thinking about how you're switching between the different roles. And then the final one is the thing I mentioned right at the start, which is make sure you know that story inside out. And that, of course, doesn't mean knowing all the words verbatim. Students that performed poorly? Yeah. That tokenistic form is like, I've prepped the two people I'm going to ask and it looked like it. So that's a good one. Or, you know, give me some words to describe the sword. Sharp. Yeah, great. Bitey. Brilliant. Let's move on. And it's just like, what the heck was that? What was the point of that question? We all know what a sword is for. So thinking about that. That only happened once. Yeah, someone that looked like they, you know, had forgotten that they were actually presenting. Yeah, I think they're all pretty clear, aren't they? They don't need me to talk over them. And then you've got the rationale. That's quite pretty. You know, I'll put that picture in. Look at that. Anyway, so the rationale is only 1,000 words. So you can imagine, what's that? 4 sides, maybe 3 sides of double-spaced writing. And in that, you're going to talk about some of the approaches that you use. So you might focus on a moment, or you might focus on how you used props and why you used them that way, or you might focus on what you did for audience participation and why you did that. And in doing that, you can see that sometimes there might be a lean on storytelling techniques and more that than anything else. And then sometimes you might see that there's a lean on storytelling techniques a little bit, but also a lean on curriculum and research around vocabulary and inference and comprehension. So you can see they kind of got either way approach, you know, and both are more than valid. So I will love both of them. Okay, so it could be choices you've made in relation to the curriculum and pedagogy, and then choices made with regard to what good storytellers do with regard to student engagement or interaction. And I guess there's no wrong way to do that at all. It's just focusing on less is better than focusing on lots. So I guess the wrong way to do it would be, I'm going to talk about props, I'm going to talk about position, I'm going to talk about voice, I'm going to talk about tone, I'm going to talk about vocabulary. 5 things in 1,000 words. How the heck would you do that? Okay, in a really critical way. But you might talk about your use of voice and tone to describe different characters and why that was important. And then you might talk about props to help get into those characters as well, because that would make sense, wouldn't it? Cohesively, talking about the props used for a character and talking about expression and tone used for the character in order to comprehend better. They sound like 2 things that are worth talking about that I could probably write 1,000 words on. But if I was going to do tone, voice, movement, props, and audience questions to talk about that character, that's a lot to get through. So I wouldn't do that many at all. And I've also said it's going to be that one essay where I say, you're very welcome to say, I made this choice because of this, or in the performance I intended to do this and this is why I was going to do that. Absolutely fine to mention that first person. The reason I say that is it would be weird to write, the performer did this. I guess you could write things like, you know, when using tone, you should do this, that, and the other. It's good to do this, but then you're disconnected from your performance. So I think it makes sense to say in the performance, I chose to do this because this, that, and the other. So you can see structurally, there's 3 parts. You've got open with an overview of what the story was, what key stage you had in mind, why that story, and then what you're going to focus on in what's on the left. So, you know, in this, I'm going to focus on audience participation because blah, blah, blah. Okay. And then you've got the main body will be you explaining what things you're focusing on and why. So it could be you evaluating the approaches that you made and why they were the right approaches, what the research said. And you can see there I've got like the main body may extend to choice and purpose of the story and include approaches made, an evaluation of those approaches, or audience participation perhaps on why you chose to do what you did, or the use of props and multimedia and why, or body, and then a reflection on how those things will improve literacy, whether it's speaking, whether it's listening, whether it's reading or writing, all those elements that you're thinking about in that way. Okay, and then that will be submitted via Turnitin. You'll upload it, and as I said, I will give you kind of in-essay comments about how you're writing, and then give you an overall feedback on the strength of your performance and the strength of your rationale, and then how you could have developed your performance and how you could develop your rationale, and I'll just give you an overall comment too. So you'll get somewhere in that feedback an overall grade for your rationale and an overall grade for your performance, and then what that means with the 50-50 overall. Just like it did for the BA1 element too. So what should the rationale itself do? Well, I think I've made that already clear. You want to make sure that you're explaining some of the choices that you made. Sometimes it might make reference to the national curriculum and EEF, or what good talk looks like, if you think that's what you're talking about. But it should also make reference to what good storytellers do, if that's the bit you want to focus on, you know, how you're using your voice and tone and how that relates to prosody and things like that. So it's up to you. Yes, there should be a decent reference list, but remember, it's only 1,000 words. So I'm more interested in you defending the thinking behind your thinking. That's the thing I want you to consider. And then I've written here, oh, there's no brackets around 10% on the introduction. How annoying. You can see that I'm saying these guidelines for percentages are usually fine, okay? But if you end up just doing audience participation for 60% and you do it really well, or you're talking about the use of props and you do it really well, I don't mind. Okay, I just care about you being critical and talking cohesively about your thinking. That's why I've said use it as a rough guide. Okay, I certainly won't be highlighting it going, well, that wasn't 10% for an introduction, that was 15%. You're penalised. That's crazy. Okay, I won't be doing those kind of things. But what is important is that your introduction and your conclusion talk to each other. So there's some reflection on what you said you'd cover and what you found out. And that when you're defending a choice that you made, when you're explaining some of the things that you did, it's always good to have more than one voice supporting your thinking. It might be you can only find one voice, and so be it. But if you can find more than one to support what you did, great. That's that kind of critical edge that you're bringing in. I think that's pretty clear. I don't think I need to add anything to that. We've got hand-in dates. Let's have a look. So the critique is handed in on the Monday, and then we've got performances on the Tuesday and Wednesday. If this is a recorded performance and it's not 2023, then it might be different. This non-existent video will explain both parts as well as the brief. Now the video exists, so we're okay there. And then of course, here's the dates. If this is a recording that isn't 2023, the dates are wrong. Okay, and then there's the references I used. Hopefully you found that helpful and useful. I think I went through it pretty slowly actually, and hopefully I was clear. If you've got any further questions, remember to go to that box in the top left, which is also I think on the main page of Moodle. And yeah, good luck everyone. I'm really excited. I realise you're all terrified, but I just hope we all have a really lovely time. If we could all go to the pub afterwards for a meal, obviously no alcoholic drink, it'd be lovely, but I'm guessing you're all going to be absolutely shattered and just want to go and sleep in a dark corner until you go on your final school practice. Otherwise, thank you for watching.